The whole point of the GR86 is that this is meant to be a daily drivable sports car. Now, we've driven the manual, to which we've determined that that is a car that's only really fit for use on the track. But now with this automatic, has that changed? Now, right before picking the GR86 up, we were actually driving around in the Subaru BRZ, and what that has revealed is that these two cars are very different. What isn't different, however, is what's going on under the bonnet. So now, instead of the 2-litre boxer that we used to have in the old GT86, we now get a 2.4-litre boxer engine, which produces 237 PS and 250 Newton meters of torque. That power goes to the rear wheels, either via a 6-speed manual transmission, or in the case of this car, a 6-speed automatic gearbox. Now, in addition to that, the automatic 86 as well as the automatic Subaru BRZ both get Subaru's EyeSight system, although Toyota obviously doesn't want to call it that, which is perhaps one of the very best vision-based ADAS systems that I've driven in any car. But we'll get onto that a little bit later. Now, talking about the 86, a lot of the design features of this car are shared with the Subaru BRZ, and that includes this very low nose, these full LED headlights replete with adaptive front lighting system, which unfortunately in this car just means that they swivel according to your steering input. They don't actually change the beam itself. You also get automatic high beam LED indicators built in. The other key differentiator is actually in terms of the grille, because in the BRZ and the 86 they each have a unique grille design. UMW Toyota says that this is an active grille design, although I have no idea which part of it is active. But more importantly, you do get a little GR badge down here in order to denote the fact that this is ultimately the Toyota. The front end design of this car, as far as I'm concerned, does seem to build off of what we first saw from the original GT86. And I do think that this front end is a little bit more elegant and a little bit more menacing. And in fact, some people have opined that the front end of this car actually looks more aggressive than what we've seen from the Toyota Supra, although that is a point that I disagree on. Moving further down the side, the BRZ and the 86 share absolutely everything, because there are no visual differentiators on the side of the vehicle, except the automatic BRZ actually comes with a little EyeSight badge here for the automatic model. The wheels are also the same, with the same alloy design, wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 5 tires. Now, these are suitably high performance, and so it does provide the car with a necessary level of grip. Although I will again point out that the suspension setup on the GR86 is very different from what you get in the BRZ, which means these two cars drive very differently indeed. Now, because of the slightly longer wheelbase of the 86 compared to the Toyota Supra, there is actually space back here for a couple of jump seats, although I will get onto that a little bit later. That said, I do prefer the design of the GR86 because I do feel that this car is a little bit more comfortable in its own skin. It looks a little bit more aggressive, and I do love the way the roofline resolves itself in the little ducktail spoiler here, the slightly more pronounced wheel arches. I do think that this car looks particularly good, and I think that this is perhaps one of the best angles for this car. Although talking about angles, I really am splitting hairs, because I do also think the back end of the 86 looks really good. So does the front end. Basically, I haven't really found an angle on this car that I don't really like. Anyway, so moving to the rear, you do have that built-in ducktail spoiler that I mentioned earlier, which I think resolves the design of this car quite nicely. You get a set of full LED tail lights, repeat with LED indicators, although your reverse lights and rear fog live down there. Now, at the rear, you also have a couple of exhaust exits, which are entirely functional. I do think help make this car sound a little bit better than it would have normally. Boxers aren't exactly known for the particularly raughty exhaust note, and now I'm just about to get a bunch of comments from Subaru owners telling me I'm wrong, but that does at least mean that these exhaust systems can be very easily upgraded to slightly noisier units should you want to, although I wouldn't advise it. The rear diffuser also doesn't really do much, because most of the aerodynamics of this car come from over the top, not really from the bottom, and so if you want to replace that rear bumper, you could do that too. Although again, I'm not really a big fan of modifications, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You get the GR86 badge here, you get the reverse camera built in up here, which means that it does get very dirty, especially on days like today when it's raining, but you do actually have the button here to release the boot itself. Now, talking about the boot, you may be surprised to see that it's only a boot lid that pops open rather than the entire rear hatch that you would in the GR Supra. That actually means that the more expensive car is also slightly more practical, because it means that it's a lot easier for you to reach into the furthest edges of the boot. On top of that, because the Supra is a strict two-seater, it does mean that that boot actually stretches in a little bit further, which means that if you have, say, golf bags, you can actually put them in lengthways into the car, whereas in the GR86, you have to put them widthways. Now, in doing so, you will also notice that this opening is not very large, and in order to fit a golf bag back here, you are stuck sort of right up here as opposed to deeper within the boot. And of course, if you were to try to fit anything particularly large in this boot, you will also encounter another issue that I have with this car, and that has to do with the spare wheel. Now, for some bizarre reason, the GR86 and the Subaru BRZ in Malaysia are specified with a full-size spare tire. Now, the problem with that is it actually sits a little bit higher than the boot floor itself, which means that you have this spare tire sort of hole in the middle of the boot floor, which means that if you're trying to load luggage into here, it creates lots of really awkward shapes. So I've had a fixed sort of hard case luggage back here and it just ended up sliding about because there's nowhere for it to really sit. On top of that, because of the way they've decided to sort of fill up this space, you can't really put anything in it either. Now, this is a bit of a hit and miss because in the Subaru BRZ, they don't even offer a cover at all. So the benefit of that is you can put stuff in the spare tire. The bad thing is it actually looks a little bit nasty. For a Toyota, however, the 86 actually does come with a carpet cover, which is nice, as well as a bit of ply in the middle of the wheel itself, which means that you can put stuff on top of it, but not in it. So I'll leave you to decide whether or not that makes a bit more sense. That said, however, the rear seats in this car do fold flat, which means that if you want to put in more items into your 86 for some bizarre reason, you can do that, although I would just advise just spend a little bit of money and get a Lala Move van to do it instead. Now, the interior of the 86 is very similar to what we've gotten from the Subaru BRZ, although there are some areas of this car that have been tweaked ever so slightly. So for example, these seats still have the semi-leather, semi-microfiber material design, replete with perforations with red inserts within them to make this car look a little bit more sporty. You get some red inserts in the center of the seat and at the center of the base, which I do think help to make the seats look a little bit more interesting. The seats themselves are designed in such a way that they hold you very nicely, and so this is not only very comfortable, but also very supportive. However, there are more red details within this car than you get in the Subaru. So for example, you get red stitching along the steering wheel itself. You also get a GR badge at the center position on the steering wheel itself, which I think looks quite nice. You also get red faux leather on the door cards in the specific insert, which I think again makes this car appeal to a slightly more sportier edge. Now, you do still get red stitching along the gear gaiter, which is again shared with the Subaru BRZ. You also get more of that stitching up here. But overall, the interior of this car is very similar to what you get in the Subaru, which means that it has all of those nice look at me bits, but it also has some of the nastier bits. So for example, the cowling for this air conditioning vent here is made of very nasty hard touch plastic. You get more of that up here, but at least the dash top itself is a little bit softer, and you still get some Alcantara or microfiber material up here on the cowling for the instrument cluster. You also get more of the Alcantara microfiber type material here on the doors. But everything else in this car is notably hard plastic. But again, the GR86 is designed and engineered to be a sports car, which means this is likely all of the choices and materials have been made likely to reduce weight. And so I kind of understand that. As we move further down, you get a central infotainment display here with nice physical knobs to do things, as well as physical buttons for lots of shortcuts, which I appreciate hugely. The screen in the middle, however, is not that large, but the interface is decently responsive and it's very easy to figure out. The only trouble is this system does not come with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It is instead a wired system with a USB coming out of the center console, which means that I've had to resort to carrying around a cable in order to run Android Auto. But at least the space in order to hold your phone and stuff lives up here, which means it is a little bit easier for you to plug that in and out. So I suppose some things are better, some things are worse. Moving down from that infotainment system, you get 3 knobs in order to control your HVAC system. So this car comes with a dual zone climate control system, and so you have one dial on this side to control temperature for the passenger, one more for the driver, and then your fan speed is controlled in the middle, although obviously you do also have an automatic function. Moving further down, you get a set of sort of piano-like keys in order to control things like your air conditioning mode and stuff like that. But unfortunately, like the Subaru BRZ and the GR86 manual, we once again have very cheap, nasty plastic down here, which I think is not fitting for a car that is pushing in excess of 300,000 ringgit. Moving further down, compared to the 86 manual that we drove, obviously we have an automatic transmission here, and the motion of which I will note is of particular interest to me because it doesn't just move up and down like you would in the regular automatic gearbox. Instead, it seems to have its own sort of shift pattern to it, which I like a lot because it adds a certain degree of tactility and actually reminds me of the W220 Mercedes and sort of that era of Mercedes-Benz, which is nice because it feels nice. You also have a manual handbrake lever here for drifty things. You also get buttons here to control your drive mode, your traction control or track mode, as well as your traction control off button. Further down, you also got your controls for the heated seat for these two front seats, though obviously you'll never be using that. As I mentioned earlier, you have a pocket here to hold your little devices and stuff like that. I also use this for my sunglasses holder because there is no sunglasses holder in this car. And moving further back, you actually get a couple of cup holders within the center console armrest. Now, this armrest itself actually feels very high quality. It's very similar in its use and its materials as you get from the Toyota Harrier. The only trouble is the cup holders themselves are quite shallow, which means that if you get a large sort of fast food type drink, they might actually spill by getting knocked over. On top of that, you can't obviously have the center console shut if you have drinks in it. But that said, at least because the center console lid itself is quite soft, you can actually run the cable through the center console lid, which means that if you don't have drinks and you just need to plug your phone in, you can still do that, which is nice. If you're trying to hide more things in this car, you actually have a decently sized glove box here, although there is sort of hard line, which means everything that you put in here is going to rattle and make quite a bit of noise. You've got decently sized door bins, big enough for a litre-sized bottle, although you have to choose between either having a bottle or, in my case, sticking my wallet and stuff in here because there isn't space for both. And overall, life in here isn't all that bad. Now, in terms of the driving, again, you have that leather-wrapped steering wheel that I mentioned earlier, but you actually have a set of paddle shifters which have a very positive action to them, which I like a lot. But up ahead also sits a semi-digital instrument cluster. We have a screen on the left side and a digital display on the right. Now, although this is not the most customizable screen in the world, with the only real change being when you put the car into track mode, as far as I'm concerned, I think this works really well because all the information is displayed in a very intelligent sort of manner, which means it's very easy for you to determine what's going on with the car at any given time, which I think is very important for vehicles like these that are most likely to be driven by enthusiasts in an enthusiastic way. And so being able to get all that information quickly is very important. There is no heads-up display, naturally, but at least the sound system in this car is not that bad, particularly given for what this is. It doesn't have a name brand audio system like the JBL system that you get from, say, the Toyota GR Supra, but it isn't all that bad for, again, a non-branded item. Now, life in the back seats is not great. I'm about 170 centimeters, so this is my driving position, and sat in the back, I have no room at all. And because the seats are mounted quite high, it means I don't have any under thigh support. Let's not even talk about headroom, but there are ISOFIX mounts in the back, which means that if you have very small children, you could stick them back there. However, because the rear windscreen actually ends up coming up to sort of beyond your head, it does mean that any children that are sat back there will be subject to very harsh light in the middle of the day, which means that you might want to tint this car a little bit more if you actually want to put children in it on a regular basis, although I really don't advise that you do. Life back there is also not so great because you don't have that many amenities, so honestly, just treat this car as a two-seater and then you'll generally be fine. Now, practical considerations with the GR86 may not make sense to a lot of you watching because I know a lot of you are now screaming at the screen telling me that this is a sports car. This happens a lot with every bloody car that I drive that has less than 4 doors. And so the focus on this car is naturally to drive. And as I alluded to earlier, after getting into this, after returning the Subaru BRZ, I've realized that there are some very stark differences between the two. Now let's figure out if that's for the better or not. Let me make one thing very clear. Absolutely any one of you considering a GR86 as a potential daily drivable sports car, this is not what this car is about. This is not what this car is for, and buying it with that sort of frame of mind will simply lead to disappointment. There are a lot of compromises with this car, but those compromises do come about for a reason. Now, firstly, as I bumble along the LDP, you can probably tell that there is quite a bit of din in this car, quite a lot of road roar. And that has to do with the fact that I think Toyota has reduced the amount of sound deadening in this car in order to get it a little bit lighter than it otherwise would be. This is, of course, because this car is powered by a naturally aspirated 2.4 litre as opposed to the turbocharged 3 litre 6-cylinder that you get in the Supra. When you have that kind of capability or that kind of power and torque available, you can get away with a slightly heavier car by adding sound deadening and stuff like that in order to improve the plushness because, again, that engine is more than enough to handle it. But in a car like this, where lightness is key, where lightness is the critical factor that makes this car as good to drive as it is, you want to remove as much unrequired weight as possible, which is why this car is as loud as it is. And I'm not bringing this up now just because the LDP is a particularly bad stretch of motorway, but this is generally what you have to deal with. Now, with over 1,100 kilometers, almost 1,200 kilometers covered since we collected this car, believe me, I have tested this on a variety of different surfaces, and anything short of freshly paved tarmac, the 86 is a very loud affair. Now, of course, the benefit of not having that much sound deadening does mean that in addition to this car being very light, it means that when you are on the power, you do enjoy quite a bit of noise. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of a boxer engine in general. I think Porsche are the only ones that know how to make this engine actually sound good. But for what it is decently raughty. It's got a very Japanese feel to it, where instead of growling or grumbling, it just sort of howls and screams a little bit, which I think is very interesting given the fact that more and more people prefer a slightly deeper, more guttural kind of noise from their cars these days, whereas the 86 seems to go firmly in the opposite direction. Also, for some bizarre reason, when you are on the throttle, it makes a little bit of a whining noise, almost as if this car is supercharged. It's not, I should make that very clear, but it's got a supercharger-like noise to it, which I think is interesting. It adds a little bit of character, and I certainly didn't notice it in the Subaru BRZ that I was driving around in the week prior to picking this up, but there we are. Now, in addition to that, there is also the matter of the ride. Now, I speak about ride as extensively as I do because I live in PJ. And for those of you who are not familiar, PJ is notorious for its particularly shitty roads. And that is something that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Now, in the Subaru BRZ, I noticed that that car had a slightly more neutral driving sort of characteristic, which made it feel a lot more tractable, a lot more usable day to day, and so even the worst of PJ roads didn't feel that bad. Yeah, not in this. So Toyota has clearly screwed with certain aspects of this car to make it feel a little bit more like what they want from a GR badge sports car. And I have to say, the secondary ride in this car can be quite punishing. Now, the primary ride, I think, is broadly the same as the BRZ, at least how the car reacts when you first hit a pothole. I think that's shared. Okay, I don't think there's really much they could do about that. But the secondary ride in this car is a lot firmer than what you get in the Subaru. And as a result, it does mean that when you're taking in, for example, longer drives on the motorway, this car never settles down. Now, I had high hopes for the 86 because this car actually has a longer wheelbase than that of a Supra, and the GR Supra is a car that I like a lot. And so I thought that this car might have similar capabilities when it comes to long distance travel. For viewers of the channel probably know that I have taken a Supra all the way up to Penang and back. I've driven that car extensively, and it is a car that I enjoy a lot every time I'm given the privilege to borrow one. But in this, unfortunately, it doesn't quite have the same sort of duality in its personality. When you're on the motorway like I am now on the federal highway, there's this constant bobbing with this car if the surface is not perfectly smooth, which it very rarely is. Now, when you take those things into account, this, as I said, makes the GR86 not particularly suitable as a daily drivable sports car. Because if you were to drive this to work and back, if you think that this is something that you should or can drive every day, you may want something that is a little bit more isolating, that's a little bit calmer, for example. But the 86 doesn't really do that. This car is not calm in the slightest. Even with the adaptive cruise control on, as it is now, the amount of noise intruding into the cabin means that you never really get a quiet sort of serenity within this cabin. Calming down is not really an option. So that brings me on to the reason why these compromises have been made, and a lot of that has to do with dynamics. Now, if we wind the clock back to when this car was launched, we were actually given the opportunity to sample the 86, the Supra manual, as well as the GR Hilux, the the GR Sport Hilux, GR Sport Corolla Cross, as well as the GR Corolla itself in Sepang. And after having driven all of these GR badged cars, I walked away from that thinking that the 86 was by far and away the most positive driving experience of the lot. There is something about this chassis, which is where the majority of the money has been spent, that makes it so incredibly positive to drive. Firstly, the steering, while devoid of feel, as is the case with many electronic power steering systems, is very, very accurate. And as a result, it means that when you are driving intently, this car, it just understands what you want of it, and it translates that to the front wheels in a very honest, very predictable kind of way. That means that, of course, when you are driving this car enthusiastically, you can trust the dynamics of this car a little bit more. When it does tend to let go at the very limits of grip and physics, it's very easy for even a novice driver like me, or a semi-novice driver like me, to be able to catch the car in whatever it is it's doing and get it to, again, sort itself out and get straight back on the straight and narrow, because this chassis is so tractable and because the car itself is as communicative as it is. That, to me, informs me that this car is something that is engineered specifically for enthusiasts. No compromises have been made in order to make this more livable day to day, because the primary focus of this car is to be fun for people who know how to have that kind of fun in a car like this. That, I think, is one of this car's strongest suits, the fact that it doesn't really compromise in order to be more livable. Because if we were to look at vehicles like the Golf GTI and the Golf R, both cars that this car competes with to some extent because it's broadly within the same price range, both of those cars have suffered as a result of their pandering to customers wanting something, or in fact engineers or product specialists wanting something that would appeal more to a slightly broader market. Because if a car is more comfortable, it's more cosseting, it's more isolating, for example, then it's a much easier sell because it's a performance car that also does other things. Whereas in this, because it's purely a performance car and it's purely been engineered as a performance car, it means that it's a lot more rewarding as a performance car. And so as an enthusiast driver, you're not going to be frustrated with this car the way I was in the Golf GTI and indeed the Golf R, because of the compromises that have been made in order to make it appeal to a broader market. However, what that does also mean is that if you are trying to convince your other half that instead of buying a new 3 Series, you ought to invest in a GR86 because you already have a family car and so a sports car only makes sense, this might be a bit of a harder sell, because I suspect that in a 10-minute test drive, your other half is going to quickly discover just how raughty and raucous and visceral an experience this car is, and then vote it down. However, if you're like me and you have no other half to report to, then this might seem like a slightly better bet. Firstly, the way it drives is so incredibly positive that every time you get in it, you may get frustrated by the amount of road noise, by the amount of wind noise and this and that, the other. You might get frustrated by the fact this car doesn't come with a 360 cam or even front parking sensors, but the way it drives will make you forgive it for 1,000 sins. It's not the best car in the world by a long shot. If you were to ask me to drive one sports car every day for the next 5 to 10 years, I'd much rather be in a GR Supra. Not only is that engine to me a bit more characterful, but also the car itself does more of the things that I need my car to do. So I travel quite a lot, and so I like the fact that the GR Supra has a bigger engine, that it's got a slightly more plush interior, that it just feels a little bit better built. And so when you are covering distances like that, it just feels like a much more comfortable, much more realistic companion to cover distance. However, if you have another car to do stuff like that, to do your regular daily grind nonsense, and you're just looking for something that is the purest expression of a sports car that we can have today, then this is it. On top of that, for the GR86 Automatic, this car also comes as standard with Subaru's EyeSight system. Of course, Toyota will call it something else, but this is ultimately a Subaru EyeSight system. And as a result, this means that you benefit from having one of the very best vision-based ADAS systems currently on the market, second only to Volvo. And so you have adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, although it only holds the car for up to 5 seconds. You have lane departure warning, lane keep, you have blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, all of the things that you need to make this a lot more livable day to day, which means that if you were to say drive this to Sepang on the weekends, when you inevitably get caught in a traffic jam on the Elite Highway, you've got adaptive cruise control to help you out. This, to me, makes the 86 like less of a compromise, but make no mistake, you are making some trade-offs in order to enjoy this kind of driving experience. As such, it does mean that if you are looking for a performance car that is slightly less of a compromise in terms of day-to-day livability, you may be better served by something like the Volkswagen Golf GTI or, in fact, the Volkswagen Golf R. But if you want this form factor or this package because you love the way it looks, like I do, and you want something that is still, it looks like this but isn't quite so harsh, then consider the Subaru BRZ, which is like for like exactly the same, even down the specifications, and yet also a little bit more affordable somehow. So at the end of the day, the 86 is still, as an automatic, a track weapon, just like the manual. For better or worse, that is what this is. If you're looking for a daily drivable sports car, look at the Subaru BRZ. If you want something more practical and livable, get a Volkswagen Golf GTI. But if you're looking for an absolutely incredible driving car, then this is it. In any case, that concludes our review of the Toyota GR86 Automatic. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.